And we're not limited to just text layers. Basically, any visual layer can become a 3D layer. So let's say that I wanted to put that checkpoint tracker that we had in the standings chart in the same place as this text, right above this building. And we can pretend that this is the first checkpoint in the event. This is where you got to go to start the competition. Well, we can bring in that checkpoint animation from the other project just by importing the entire After Effects project into this one. So just like any other asset, I'm going to double click in the project panel and then navigate to the After Effects project file, standings.aep. I'm going to import that, and it's going to come in with everything that was in that project as a folder. I can open that up and see all of the comps that we had. The one that I want in particular is the map marker. If I double click on it, remember this is what we created before. I don't really need anything else from this project. So what I'm going to do is drag this out, collapse that folder up, and then just delete this standings.aep folder. Now it's going to ask me, are you sure you want to delete this? I'm going to say delete, and we did lose a layer here. If I undo, remember that we had a map marker.illustrator file. That was what we created shapes from to get these vector shape layers. That asset was in this folders, and I don't need that Illustrator file, but I guess just to be safe, why don't I use one handy feature of After Effects that'll make sure I don't delete anything that I need for these comps. To do that, I'm going to select the two comps that I want to maintain, contents and all, and then come up to File, down to Dependencies, and say Reduce Project. When I click that, After Effects is going to remove everything that is not needed for those two comps, whatever you had selected. I'll click OK, and now in this folder, all that's left is that map marker. So I'm just going to grab that assets folder, drag it out of here, and delete that standings.aep folder, and we're back to having just what we need to work with. So I'm just going to add one more footage folder real quick and drag this stock clip into it so we keep everything nice and clean. I'll also make a pre-comps folder. Again, organization is completely up to you how you want to do it. I just strongly encourage you to actually stay organized. I'm going to drag that map marker into the pre-comps and then go back to my checkpoint 1 track. Now let's say I want to bring that map marker into this scene. I'm just going to click and drag it into the comp. And this is a 2D layer, so it is not going to track until I just enable the 3D switch. Now notice where it went. Kind of down and to the right here. This is just because of the way that After Effects is converting the 2D coordinates to the 3D coordinates. If we come up to the position property, it's set to 1077 by 508. If I just set that down to 0 and 0, then it's going to land right where we set the ground plane and origin. So the origin is 0, 0, 0 on the position. But I want it to be more where the text is. So what I'm going to do is another neat little trick in After Effects, which uses the parent pick whip. If I click and drag that to the first text layer, notice over here on this text, it says hold shift to move layer to location of parent. That's exactly what I want. I'm going to hold shift, let go, and now the map marker has inherited all of the transform properties of the parent layer, not just the position, but also the scale and the rotation. So it's aligned exactly the same as what we did with the text. So I'm just going to scale this down so it's in line a little bit more with the text and maybe lift it up above that text layer. And let's add a fill effect to that map marker and make it the same color as the text. Now I have the graphic and the text tracked into the shot. And if I move this map marker forward, that animation is preserved within the pre-comp. So I could time this to come out at a spot where it's a little easier to see, maybe right about here, where those trees in the background are giving it good contrast so it's not getting lost in the sky. It's getting cropped off a little bit on the top, but I can just reposition this. Now that map marker is going to animate in and still be locked in place with that 3D camera track. Very simple and easy to do. Now, I don't need these extra layers in the background, these other two text layers, so I'm just going to delete them. And I obviously don't want this text to say text. So why don't we change this to something that actually applies to this shot? So remember, this is maybe the first checkpoint, and this shot has a really great view of this valley in the mountains. It's very cool. So why don't we just put in some text that says something like, enjoy the view. Now that made the text much larger, much longer. So I'm going to scale that down a little bit. And the camera's kind of rotating away from the text in the graphic. So why don't we orient this 90 degrees so that at this point, the text is facing the camera? Well, since the map marker is already parented to the text, I can just rotate the text layer. And if I hold down the shift key while doing this, it's gonna snap to 45-degree increments. So I can be sure that if I go 90 degrees, it's going to be perpendicular to the way that it was before. So now it's kind of like the camera's wrapping around this platform and revealing this text. Why don't we have that text come out a little bit further? And if I scrub through here, we can see that, yep, that's kind of aligned with the front edge of that ridge. Maybe I'll bring it out just a little bit more. And then I could drop all of this down a little bit just so we can see that checkpoint marker a little more easily. Okay, something like that. Now, if I play this back in real time and you take note that this shot is 20 seconds long, you realize that the camera's moving pretty slow. So what I'd really like to do is get to this point about 5 seconds in much more quickly than 5 seconds. So maybe we could do a speed ramp into this spot. Up to this point in time, animate the text and the checkpoint marker in while this is playing in real time, and then speed ramp again out and sweep back to show this awesome view much more quickly. So it'll be a much quicker clip, maybe only about 5 seconds long once we're done with it. Well, I don't want to do the speed ramping in this comp because this is where all of our 3D camera tracker data is and where the actual 3D animated elements are. I'd rather leave this at real time and animate in real time and then do my speed ramping in a separate comp. So to do that, I'm going to jump back to the project panel, grab that checkpoint 1 track, then click and drag it down to this comp button. And I'm going to immediately rename this checkpoint 1, and we'll just simply call it that. Then I'll take that track comp and move it into the pre-comps for organization. Now this checkpoint 1 comp, I need it to be 1920 by 1080 because that's my export format. I'm not working at 2K, I'm working at full HD. So I'm going to go up to the composition settings now that the tracking data is pre-composed and change this to 1920 by 1080. That way all of that tracking data is preserved. I can still get to the 3D camera tracker if I go into the pre-comp. And in this comp, everything in this shot is contained in one layer. So how do we time remap something in After Effects? Well, just like a lot of other things, there's many different ways to do it. We could do it with effects. We could do it with a switch that we haven't looked at right here, the stretch slider. But the way that I want to do it is with what's actually called time remapping, because I think it gives you the most flexibility and control over how things are playing out. And it's done with keyframes, which should be pretty familiar. To enable it, I'm going to right-click on my layer, come down to the Time menu, and just go to Enable Time Remapping. When I click on that, we're going to get this new property that shows up, Time Remap, with a timecode value and 2 keyframes. These are the starting and ending time codes for that clip aligned where they need to be in the timeline in order to play this back in real time. But if I were to grab this second keyframe and bring it back to say 4 seconds, now that entire pre-comp is going to play back in 4 seconds. I'll just press the space bar to preview this. Now that's playing back much faster. But that's obviously not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to just speed up the entire thing. So let me undo. What I wanted to do is take about this first 5 seconds and really speed that portion up. Then go back to real time. And then after the text and the map marker are revealed, speed up again to show this big epic shot. So what I want to do is set keyframes at the starting and ending points of where I want it to play in real time. So I think about here is where I want the map marker and the text to come in. So this is where the speed ramp should stop. I'm going to set a keyframe just by clicking on the Add Keyframe button right there on that Time Remap property. And then just press the space bar to play this back for a few seconds. And I'm thinking right about there is where I want to speed ramp back up into a faster playback. So I'm going to set another keyframe right there. In this area between these 2 keyframes, I always want to keep that amount of distance between. That way it's always going to play back in real time at full frame rate between those 2 keyframes. If I were to click and drag this around, then it's going to play slower or faster depending on how I've changed that relationship. So I'm going to undo and make sure that I don't accidentally do that. Let's focus on the first half and getting into this keyframe. What I want to do is select these 3 keyframes and move them all forward in time until about a second, maybe even a half a second, but somewhere in there. What we're going to see is that it plays back quickly at first, and then once it hits the second keyframe, go back to real time. Okay, and I think we could go even faster. So let's click and drag those 3 keyframes back even more. So we very quickly land at that point where we're going to animate the elements on. And then from this keyframe on, I want to do the same thing. This time only grabbing the last keyframe. Remember, I don't want to change the distance between these 2 keyframes or else I'll lose my real-time playback. So I'll just grab this last keyframe and really crank it in and just see how quickly that plays back now. That's pretty good, but I think we could even speed that up a little bit more. So real time and then speed up and out. Yeah, that looks good. Now, the screen went black after that last keyframe. If I align my playhead to the keyframe, it goes blank. That's just because of the way that the time remap sets the keyframe on the last frame of the clip. It's actually totally blank. So what I could do is just edit this value and change 12 to 11 frames. And now this is the final frame that we can actually see. And everything after that will just be a hold frame. Obviously, I don't need all of that, but it at least won't go black this way. So let's play this back from the beginning. We've got fast speed, normal speed, and then it speeds up again. But these aren't really speed ramps. These are just speed changes. It's the exact same concept of linear keyframes to eased keyframes. Right now, all these keyframes are totally linear. But if I zoom in here and jump into my graph editor, we can modify these keyframes in the same way as we did with any other property. The only thing is, I don't want to easy ease these two middle keyframes. Because again, if I did that, let me jump into the graph editor with these two selected. If I easy eased them, now it's not going to be a linear playback where I want it to be. It's going to ease into playback and then ease out of playback. So I'm going to undo that. And instead, I'm just going to select this part of this handle. We've never really dealt with separate influence handles on the same keyframe, but that's what we're seeing here. We have outgoing influence and incoming influence. Because I didn't easy ease these handles are separated. But if I just click and drag this one and bring it down, this is again the incoming influence for this second keyframe. Eventually it's going to snap into place because I have snapping enabled. So this curve is going to ease back into playing into this linear real time. So it's going to move really fast at the start and get to that linear playback. So let's see what that looks like. There we go. You see how that makes a pretty big difference in how this is playing back. If I undo back to before I added the easing, we have speed 1 and speed 2. But if I just ease that out one more time, instead we're going to have fast speed easing into that real-time playback. And I can do the same thing on this end. Instead of going from real time to a little bit faster, I can grab this handle, drag it down till it snaps and pull out the influence so that it's now going to ease out of real time and into the faster speed. And you'll notice this is taking a little bit longer to preview. As we do more complex things with footage, with more effects, and with 3D data, it might take After Effects a little bit of time to preview the first time through. But now that this is previewed and I've got my green bar cached, I'm gonna go to that last keyframe and press N to set my end work area and play this back as a whole. So we've got real-time playback and then it eases into moving really fast again. One more time, easing out into faster speed. That is a speed ramp. With my speed ramp set up, now I can jump back into this comp and do whatever I want, and everything about that speed ramp is still going to be preserved in this comp. So I'm just gonna click and drag this all the way over to the left. That way I can rearrange these and know that this one all the way on the left, that's kind of my render comp, and these are my working comps. I don't need to have this one open, so I'll just close it. But in my checkpoint 1 track, again, this is where all that tracking data exists. It's the 2K resolution instead of 1920 by 1080, and I have access to all the individual layers. So why don't we animate this text coming in? We haven't really animated any text yet, and text animation is a pretty complex topic, but it's something that you're inevitably going to need to do. Making text move is just part of motion design. So let's get a quick rundown of how text animators work. And to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to make a new composition just so we can work in 2D and not have to deal with the 3D controls right now. So I'm just gonna call this text example, click OK, and then type out some text. So I'll go to my type tool and I'll say the same thing. Let's say enjoy the view. All right. And I'll align that to the center of my comp and make it a little larger. If you remember when we animated the tracking of the text, we couldn't do it through this property right here. We had to use a text animator. That's what we're gonna do right here, except we're going to control the position instead of the tracking. So I'm gonna go into my text layer, into the text controls, and then click on the animate drop-down menu. This is where you can add any transform property, color properties, and lots of other things. They're all going off my screen here. Let me make this a little bigger. Anything you see in this list can be animated on a text layer. So let's just grab the position since that's what we're actually concerned with animating. that's going to add an animator1 group with a range selector and the position value. By default, it's set to 0 on the X and the Y, so nothing about my text layer has changed. But if I were to grab the Y position and back it up, that's going to lift the text off of the baseline where it was originally. So why don't we just arbitrarily move this up and then go into the range selector, because this is how we animate this text. That just moving it up isn't anything special. I could have done that without an animator. The range selector is what allows us to animate from where we moved it back to where it was originally. And we're going to do this with the offset property. So if I set a keyframe on the offset property at a value of 0, and then I move forward a little bit in time and change this to 100%, you see how that just animated my text down. Now it's going to animate from point A, where I've set this position value, to point B, the resting state or the neutral state before we added any of this animation control. So let me play that back and you'll see that it's dropping one character at a time and it's doing it very linearly. While easing things in text animators is not as straightforward as it is with keyframes in the graph editor. You need to dig through some of these menus, the controls are labeled differently, and I'm not gonna bog you down with all of that information. I just wanted to show you the foundation of how this works so that you understand what text animators are actually doing. So I'm just gonna delete that text animator. But if we come over to the animation presets in the effects and presets panel and into the presets folder, there's a specific folder for text presets. And there are lots and lots of categories in this folder that are full of text animators that you should explore and see how they can help your workflow. But specifically the animate in and animate out categories have lots of really great options, some of which I actually created for Adobe. So there's one right here called slide and pop in that I particularly like. If I double click to apply it, it's going to make the text invisible, but if I press the space bar, you'll see that the text appears and drops down. So it doesn't have to go all the way off the screen or anything to be revealed. It just appears and drops into place, and by default is very eased. Now, I've actually gone a step further and added controls up in the effects controls that allow you to modify this text animator without actually having to go through the menu items. So if you wanted to move the text further up or down, just come to this Y position offset slider and adjust this to whatever you want. You could increase it to a positive direction, and then it's going to come from the bottom, or go to a negative number and it'll come from the top. Like I said, there are lots and lots of text animators in here, so explore the list, see what you like and what you can use in your own projects. I'd like to use this preset, so I'm just going to close out of that text example. And I can apply this exact same thing to a 3D text layer. So I'll just click and drag it out to that text layer, press U to bring up the keyframes, and I want to trim my layer to that point. So I'll just press Alt or Option in the left square bracket and press the space bar. Now that text drops into place and appears at the same time. Now I don't want it to go quite so far up, so I'm just going to bring this in a little bit, maybe around 40, and now my text appears and drops into place. Now I want that to happen right around the 5-second mark, because remember, that's where we are speed ramping into real time. So maybe I'll just back this up a little bit and move the map marker animation forward as well. That way the text comes in first and then my map marker pops out. Okay, let's go back to the checkpoint 1 comp now and see how it plays together with the speed ramp. So it plays fast, text pops in, map marker, and then it speed ramps back out. Everything looks good, except it looks like that text layer drops out right there at the end. So let's go find out what that's about. Yep, the end of the layer just needs to be extended out. So I'll click and drag that out to the end of the comp, and now that should stay in place for the duration of the clip. As the camera is rotating around, I'm noticing that checkpoint isn't really aligned to the ridge, and I'd like to lock that in place. So why don't we just grab that? And I know that it's aligned to the center of the text, so I'm going to use that since it's the parent layer and just shift it over a little bit so that it looks like it's right out in front of that ridge point right here. There we go, that looks pretty good. But very quickly and easily, using that text preset, I'm able to add some life to the actual text, all synchronized with the speed ramp that we created, and it's all feeling very cohesive.